Hoi! I've spent the last days playing a bunch of support and testing Lono's mask on various guards. And today I want to talk about my findings, and we're going to do that in form of the top 10 guards for Lono's mask. Obviously, this is personal opinion. There is a lot of flexibility here. There's a lot of other choices that could have been made. This is just the guards that I think work really well with it. And I will present my arguments for the individual guards, and I'm also going to talk a little bit about builds for each of them. Before we begin, let's quickly talk about a baseline of builds for these guards, because a lot of support builds are very similar and are also somewhat situational. If you aren't interested in the builds at all, feel free to skip to around 2 minutes. I'll put the exact timestamp in the description. So the starter item is obviously going to be Protector's Mask, because this is a Lono's Mask tier list, and that's the only way we can actually get it. The first item afterwards is always going to be Gauntlet of Thieves. While the aura itself is not as important because you already get a protection aura later on, this is your bridge aura until you get there, and this item also comes with a lot of protection in general, which really benefits Lono's passive, which requires you to have a lot of protection. In addition, Glowing Emerald, the tier 1, is also fantastic to get you through early game. After that, things are a lot more flexible. One item that I generally like with a lot of the Lono supports, because they don't necessarily have the highest base protections to begin with, especially in the early stages of the game, is Spirit Robe, simply because it greatly enhances your survivability. Outside of that, other cooldown reduction items depend a little bit on the guard. Some of them will benefit from Pridwen, some from Shogun's Kusari, depending on your team as well, Mantle of Discord if you need a bit more self-peel, Chronos Pendant if you want to go really heavy on the cooldown reduction, can get away with that on some of the mage supports, Sphinx Baubles if you want to go even further in that direction, and outside of that, Sovereignty and Hardroot Amulet obviously should be mentioned as well as the general protection auras that you'll sometimes use. Only Hunter's Garb as the main extra mitigation choice is also something that shouldn't be overlooked, because sometimes you aren't tanky enough otherwise. Of course, there are more flex and counter options, but these should give you a good baseline for the general build. Now it's time to move on to the guards. In spot number 10, I have a goddess that I was hesitant to put on this list in the first place, but maybe she can stand as a bigger example for this group of gods, and that is Aphrodite. So here's the problem with Aphrodite. She doesn't really facilitate a playstyle that would require Lono's Mask, and she needs to have 300 protections in total to use Lono's Mask in order to not get her healing reduced by it. Also, when she's played as a support, she's typically still not the one face tanking most of the damage most of the time. You usually have your solo laner taking that part over, so Lono's Mask has a limited benefit for her in general. I personally feel like if you have to put her into support in the first place, you may be better off doing it without Lono's Mask and with another starter, so that you're able to build more power items so that you can increase your healing more as well. And the same thing is even more true for the other two healing mages that people like to put into support sometimes, and that's Hel and Shanghar. Those rely on power scaling even more and also don't really come with a lot of CC. So for them, having their healing reduced for a fraction of the game can be a big issue, and if you can't build around that, it seems to be too much of a trade-off in my opinion to have much value. So yes, you can force it if you really want to, but you'll have to delay your Lonos until you have sufficient protection stacks, and in my opinion, there are just better ways to play these cards either in mid or in solo. Spot number 9 also goes to a guard that I was somewhat hesitant to put here, and that is Lancelot. Lancelot is not your typical support style character. He is more played in a way like some aggressive warrior supports. Think for example Achilles or Sun Wukong. Building Lono's Mask takes away some of that early game aggression potential, but he still comes with pretty decent CC overall, especially his ultimate is a very interesting control ability. The major downside to his CC is that pretty much all of it comes with a delay beforehand. Either you have to mount up first, or the skill itself is delayed like his 2. You want to prioritize defensive stats and cooldown reduction, but an option that you could consider is Gladiator's Shield, because it scales off your protections, or if the game was long enough, maybe even a Heartseeker. But again, only if you reached full Lono stacks. Over time, Hi-Rez has targeted Serqet's support capabilities pretty heavily, but I think with Lono's Mask, she has at least a little bit of potential to actually make things work in her favor. While it may not bring back her glory support days, it's enough for spot number 8 on this list. Her problem is similar to that of Aphrodite in that she needs power in order to fully get the effectiveness out of her ultimate, but it's hard to invest into power when you have to counter the effect of Lono's Mask. Now to achieve that, I would recommend including both Spirit Robe and Mantle of Discord in your build if possible, because that covers a lot of the defense very quickly and also gives you a decent amount of CDR. And that's similar to Achilles, frees up room for items like Glide Shield or Heartseeker. In spot number 7, I have Artemis. Now Artemis, in my opinion, is the best support hunter. There are a few others that could be considered, like Anhur, Heimdall, Danzaburo, but those are more niche cases that really require the right setup around them, and where the biggest trade-off is that you lose a lot of damage and you don't really gain that much effectiveness in return. Artemis, however, has 3 abilities with decent CCs at least, 2 of them with very strong CCs, that can be on a relatively short cooldown. And then your second ability can simply be used to speed up and catch up to enemies. Now keep this in mind, there are essentially 2 ways to play Artemis support. The traditional way, so to speak, is building into Animosity and building at least some DPS along with it, building items like, for example, Shogun's Kusari, building Kinsai, building Executioner, like options that would make you more of a hybrid. But you can actually go full support with Lonos, because if you have Lonos and you have some other defensive options, then you should be able to just face tank a lot of the damage that comes your way. And then your goal should be to just get as much cooldown reduction as possible to constantly trap people. If you're able to go all the way to 60% cooldown reduction with Sphinx Baubles once it's enabled again, then you will be able to trap someone every 4 seconds, and the route lasts for 2 seconds. So until they're getting hit by a decent amount of diminishing returns, that's a pretty good baseline. And that's further supplemented by a 25% slow from your 3 in between, and of course, by your massive controlling ultimate. But in order to get that type of build going and still get full Lono stacks, you may have to forego items that would increase your DPS and really just focus on the cooldown and defense side. Spot number 6 goes to Thor. Pretty straightforward, big CC in the ultimate and the wall SQCC. Obviously already being used in a supportive type of playstyle when being played in solo, and this is just extending that even further and making it a little bit beefier along with it as well. Thor support works best when you also face solo laner that can dive and engage on their own, so that you can get most of the pressure possible out of your ultimate. As with Lancelot and Saket, if you can squeeze in some damage items, Gladiator Shield, Heartseeker, those can go a long way in late game as well. On the note of Thor, I also want to mention Metatusker and Thanatos, which basically somewhat do a similar thing, but in my opinion Thor overall does it best, has the safest, most reliable lane clear of the 3, and in my opinion also the most valuable CC, because he's able to block off multiple targets much easier outside of his ultimate as well. But the other 2 still fulfill a similar niche if you want to play that type of style. My 5th place goes to Iset. Now Iset has great support capabilities. Her Spirit Ball and her Silence are on a very short cooldown, and she can frequently provide her allies with shields through that as well. If you chase someone with your combo, that feels absolutely great. But there are a few buts with Iset. The first one is her general base stats. Her base stats are just on the very, very low end for a mage, and this is something that you will notice when it comes to survivability. She will not feel as tanky as a tank, even with Lono's Mask, whereas some other mages actually basically feel like guardians. Additionally, the benefits that her abilities provide don't really change between playing her in mid or in support, only that in support you will do significantly less damage because you need to build a lot more defensive items. And that was something that I really noticed. There isn't really as much of a threat behind a Spirit Ball when it doesn't do nearly the same damage. And likewise, especially the ultimate, the Circle of Protection, is something that works best when you have a support setting up enemies for you, so you can guarantee them being in the ultimate. When you're that support yourself and all of your CC is pretty much single target most of the time, you will not get the same benefit as you would if someone else is setting up more along with you. Iset support definitely feels fun, especially with Sphinx Baubles, but you really have to be careful at that point because you're reducing your healing potentially from both Lonos as well as Baubles if you don't get your stats right. So there's a lot of buts and ifs where I'd just rather have her in middle and just play another support instead. Spot number 4 brings a guard back into his old role, only that he's gotten a few changes and buffs since, and that is Hades. Now Hades is traditionally not looked at as a support that much because his base kit, outside of his ultimate, doesn't have that much support potential. You have a silence/fear, but that's conditional, and same thing with the slow. There are most certainly weak points in his power curve, and Protector's Mask also makes his early a little bit less oppressive, but that doesn't mean that he doesn't feel great as a support. Mainly because he is just so incredibly tanky. He already has high protective base stats, and then you slap Lonos on top of that, and then Pillar of Agony, the ultimate, provides you with up to 160 extra protections and 10% damage mitigation. So for the duration of the ult, you are pretty much damage immune, more or less. And that, in my opinion, is the angle you should be playing. You should be building very, very tanky to be able to be very aggressive, be very much in the enemy's face, and either see if you can bait out their other abilities so you can force them into the pillar, or just aggressively blink and then force a bunch of beats and escapes at the start of a team fight. Again, Hades as a support definitely still has weak spots, but being oppressively tanky is something that's still hard to deal with for the enemies. You can focus on cooldown reduction, or you can also simply focus on team auras and make your entire team as tanky as possible along with you for the moments where you can't do that much. One item that I would recommend less than on other gods is Pridwin, because you're tanky enough during your ult, and after your ult, usually most of the enemies are either dead or have run away. But do consider building Blink Rune. Spot number 3 also goes to a long-time support god that's not really a support, and that is Fenrir. Not only has he got strong CC, he also gets increased protections in multiple of his abilities, so really this is pretty much a no-brainer. Build-wise, aside of Pridwin, you want to go heavy on the protection and mitigation side of things, because it doesn't really matter if your 1 is off cooldown in a fight when you don't have 5 stacks on your passive again, and if you're tankier and you can stay in the fight longer to build those stacks again, that's probably going to benefit you more in the fight. And in second place we have Nox. Nox, in my opinion, feels so good with Lono's Mask that this may actually be her calling. She's always had her troubles fitting into the Conquest meta. It was always kind of hard to find the right niche for her, and maybe, just maybe, this is it. Lonos can actually make her tanky enough so that she can use her 3 to body block for allies instead of using it as an escape, just dash into the line of fire. Also keep in mind, while your muscle memory will probably tell you to use your 2 and 1 as a combo, and that's what I kept trying most of the time, that is probably not the most logical thing to do when playing as a support. Using them separately will often make more sense because your damage most of the time from that combo won't be all that high anyways. But if you can effectively use the silence to deny the enemy an attack and then root them at some other moment to hold them off or to make them an easy target, that can actually benefit your team more. But it's a lot of unlearning that you have to do in that case first. Still, success with Nox support will be very aim reliant. Also, you can go down different paths. You can, for example, build Chronos Pendant as a heavy CDR item, or you can do a Sphinx Bauble build with more defensive items beforehand. You can do both, but that's extremely difficult because then you can only reach 60% cooldown reduction by actually getting pots in late game, so it's up to you if you want to go down that path. It really restricts your item choices otherwise, so I don't know if it's worth it. And in spot number 1, who else could it be? Baron Samedi. If you haven't seen my gameplay with him, I'll link it here at the end, but in my opinion he is one of, if not the best Lonos supports out there. He has tanky base sets for a mage, he has CC, he has high utility, he even has a heal, so yeah, he has the full package. Keep in mind, the healing is not reduced initially with the Protector's Mask, but once you get to Lono's Mask, it will be reduced until you get to full stacks. This is always important, because even though Samedi doesn't revolve entirely around his heals like some of the more heal-focused characters, it'll still be a little bit of a hit that you have to remember that your allies will take effectively. And as such, a bit of advice here as well, you don't need to immediately upgrade Lonos at level 15 all the time. You can keep it for the extra gold for a while, and then upgrade it later once you have more protections. Especially with gods like Samedi, this can make a lot of sense, but pretty much for anyone this can be a good idea. In my testing I've sometimes upgraded at 3 bravery stacks, but ideally I would say you want to have 4, it's just sometimes you just want to have that defensive aura going. Build-wise, Samedi is similar to Nox. You can either go down a path with Chronos Pendant or Sphinx Baubles. Again, if you're building both, it's relatively restrictive in which options you still have if you also want to get your Lono stacks. Again, this list is personal opinion based on my experience and my predictions. Yours may be completely different, and that is fine. Feel free to let me know in the comments which gods you prefer most with Lonos. Also, if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing and clicking the bell. if you want to see more videos like this in the future. Important note for the next days. Multiversus is coming out soon and I'm working on a lot of content surrounding that, so there won't be as many Smite videos. I still have quite a few things to test and say surrounding the mid-season patch, but I'll have to put those on hold for a little bit. I hope that's understandable and I'll try and sneak in a Smite video here and there. If you're interested in Multiversus, a class-based platform fighting game, then I will put a video link for that at the end as well so you can check it out. With that, thank you very much for watching and I hope to see you for the next one soon. Dukesloth out.